They did a very low-key, poor traditional marriage, and all the villagers laughed at them to scorn, especially the ladies he had asked out. Their marriage became a thing of mockery. In a small village called Okoroba, there lived a man named Tamuno. Tamuno was a simple farmer. He planted crops and cleared people's farms to survive. His family was so poor that even the poor in the village called them poor. He was the only child of Grandma and Grandpa Akbi. In his entire lifetime, all Grandpa Akbi had achieved was an old bicycle, which he still rode happily. Grandpa Akbi was nearly 90 years old but was very strong and smart and still went to the farm. He was a very poor man but was always a cheerful old man. He believed his son wouldn't end up poor like him, even though he didn't know how. Some days, Tamuno would cry looking at their very old house, his parents, and the fact that he couldn't do anything to help their situation. That was what killed him the most. He couldn't even further his education and had to stop at high school. But Grandpa Akbi would encourage him and tell him he would be a great man someday. Son, just do what you're doing. Don't stain your hands. Let your conscience be pure and keep working hard. One day, it will be your turn to shine. These words kept Tamuno going. Each time he felt like giving up, he remembered his father's words and would find a sense of hope to continue. Son, you know there's more hope for a living dog than a dead lion, Grandpa Akbi would often say. And Tamuno would always answer, yes, Papa. At the age of 30, Tamuno wanted a wife, but no one wanted him. All the ladies in the village laughed at him. Can you even pay my bride price? Even if you work for a whole year you would never come close, they would say. Some would mock him, calling him poor and wretched. Will you sell your old bicycle to pay my bride price? They sneered. He couldn't have a girlfriend because no one wanted to date him. One day while returning from the farm he met Tenna, a very beautiful woman from Okoroba. She was an orphan. She didn't have friends and was also the only child of her late parents. She had nothing but an old sewing machine that she had inherited from her mother. With it, she mended people's clothes to survive, while also feeding from her small farm. Though Tamuno was from a poor home, Tenna's case was even worse than his. They quickly became friends as they had both been isolated for so long. Finally seeing someone they could talk to was a relief. Tamuno quickly asked Tenna to marry him. I want to see your relatives, he said. But Tenna replied, I don't have any relatives that I know of. It has always been me and my parents before they passed on. There is an elderly couple who live close to my house. They are like my parents. They've really been encouraging me. I'll talk to them to stand in for me as my parents. Oh, that's fine, Tamuno said. So they did a very low-key, poor traditional marriage, and all the villagers laughed at them to scorn, especially the ladies he had asked out. Their marriage became a thing of mockery. People would say, they can only marry each other. They are perfect together. Poverty plus poverty equals abject poverty, and they would laugh. But Tamuno and Tenna didn't care. They were happy. No matter what people called them, it didn't bother them. What mattered to them was that they were married and happy with each other. They were always together, going to the farm and market side by side. Some elderly villagers admired their love, but the young women continued to mock and humiliate them. One sunny day, Tamuno was weeding his farm as usual. He worked hard, clearing the land, when he encountered a strong tree with very deep roots. He tried to pull the tree out, but it wouldn't budge. Determined, Tamuno decided to dig around the roots. He dug and dug, but the roots seemed to go deeper and deeper. He grew tired, but something inside him urged him to keep going. Keep digging, a voice seemed to whisper. So he kept digging. Then he saw something shining from beneath the roots. Curious, he dug further and uncovered a large, dazzling diamond. His heart pounded in his chest. He quickly covered it with cloth, placed it inside his tool bag, and pulled the tree out to make it seem like nothing unusual had happened. Without wasting time, he ran straight home to his father. When Grandpa Akbi saw the diamond, his eyes widened in shock and joy. Do you know what this is, son? He asked, his voice trembling. It's a diamond. Tamuno barely understood the worth of what he had found, but Grandpa Akbi did. We must not tell anyone, Grandpa Akbi said firmly. Let this remain within the walls of this house. Son, do you know what this means? This is a fortune. If we sell it. Tamuno listened intently. He had no idea how valuable the diamond was, but his father did. Very early tomorrow morning, we're going to the city to see my friend Mr. Tony, Grandpa Akbi continued. He's a goldsmith. He will help us check if it's real. Tony is a good man. He won't cheat us. That night, Grandpa Akbi called Mr. Tony and explained everything. They arranged to meet the next day. At the first light of dawn, Tamuno and his father set out for the city. When Mr. Tony saw the diamond, he gasped, his mouth falling open. "This is worth billions," he exclaimed. Tamuno and Grandpa Acby stared at him, speechless. Then they screamed in excitement. Mr. Tony nodded eagerly. "I know a very rich man who deals in pure gold, diamonds, and all manner of precious stones. He will buy it." That night, Tamuno and his father stayed at Mr. Tony's house, discussing their plans. They were overjoyed. The next day they went to the rich man's mansion. When the man saw the diamond, his face lit up. He immediately recognized its value and quickly purchased it, paying them an enormous sum of money. Just like that, Tamuno and his family became billionaires in one day. With the help of Mr. Tony, they bought a beautiful house in the city. Tamuno then returned to the village to bring his wife and mother to their new home. Tena, who had always been passionate about sewing, was sent to a prestigious fashion school in the city. After a year and 6 months, she graduated as the top student and started her own fashion house. Many apprentices came from far and wide to learn from her. Tamuno also started a furniture business, something he had always loved but never had the money to pursue. Now he was a successful businessman. One day Grandpa Acby sat his son down and said, "My son, we are old and not used to this city life. We want to go back to our village and live in our home. That's where we belong, and that's where we want to be buried." Tamuno listened quietly as his father continued. "You and your wife can stay in the city, but please, when we join our ancestors, don't abandon the village. Visit the house with your children. Don't let it be forgotten." Tamuno nodded and smiled. "I've heard you, Papa. But you're not going back to that old house. Give me 3 months and I will transform it." True to his word, construction began immediately. The villagers watched in confusion and curiosity, wondering what was happening. In 3 months, Tamuno had built a magnificent mansion in the village for his parents. When Grandpa Acby and his wife arrived back in the village, they came in a luxurious jeep. The entire village gathered, their jaws dropping in disbelief. The same people who had mocked Tamuno and Tena were now speechless. They had once laughed at their love, their poverty, and their struggles. Now they stood in awe as the couple returned, not as outcasts, but as the wealthiest family in Okoroba. The maidens who had once mocked Tamuno now stood in shock and regret. "It's not good to write anybody off," they murmured among themselves. "God can change anybody." Tamuno and his wife spent a week with his parents in the village before returning to the city. They made sure Grandpa and Grandma Acby were well taken care of, sending them a generous weekly allowance. His parents never had to work again and lived out the rest of their years in happiness. 5 years later, they passed away peacefully at a good old age. As they had promised, Tamuno and his family visited the village every year, especially during Christmas. They employed someone to maintain the mansion, ensuring it remained in perfect condition. And so they lived happily ever after. I hope you enjoyed this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. Don't forget to like, share, and comment. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you'll be notified each time we make a new post.